The Little Mermaid, a classic tale thought by some to be a romance, others to be the story of a nerd going to extreme measures for her hobbies, and perhaps even laden with deeply queer and deeply religious allegory. Not just because anyone is putting chemicals in the water to make the frickin' mermaids gay. While most of us are probably most familiar with the modern adaptations, the original tale was published all the way back in 1937, making it almost 200 years old. The story was written by Danish author Hans Christian Andersen, or Christian for short, not Hans, which was pretty fitting for reasons we'll get into later. This particular short story portrays the unique influences of Christian's time, his home, and his personal identity. So, to fully understand it, let's start by taking a look at the author himself. Christian was born in Odense, Denmark in 1805. His early life is marked with speculation by his father and paternal grandmother of his family's alleged origins in Danish nobility, or even royalty, though these claims were pretty unfounded. Sort of a, well, my cousin heard from her friend whose dog said situation. Despite this, he still grew up hearing plenty of tales of royalty, magic, and religion. His father made sure to introduce him to literature early, raising him on tales from the Arabian Nights and the Bible. Then his dad died, his mom remarried, and Christian got to attend school and also do a bit of child labor. At 14, he moved to Copenhagen to find work. Christian eventually found himself in the Royal Danish Theatre. While there, a colleague of his mentioned he considered Christian to be a poet, and that's when he began taking writing seriously. Just think, you too could make an offhanded comment that leads to your coworker becoming famous one day. So from there, he did have trouble actually holding down a job, but made a lot of friends and connections and, in the process, eventually had one of his mentors along with King Frederick VI paying him to go to school. Good for him! I mean, he also later said that school was some of the worst years of his life, but no student loan debt. And from there, he went on to publish a number of fairy tales. These ranged from Thumbelina to The Emperor's New Clothes. As a rising star in European literature, Christian found himself gaining access to new friends, colleagues, acquaintances, and potential lovers. Christian arguably never, or at least very rarely, had any formal romantic relationships. But he had more than his fair share of crushes. His personal writings held references to the first of all princes that I really find attractive, and how his sentiments for his patron son were those of a woman. And while he had no shortage of similar sentiments for the women in his life, this didn't save him from the potential pitfalls of having any feelings of attraction in Europe circa 1860. He wrote about a visit to a brothel, a kind of business notable for its many ladies, where he met one of the workers and paid 12 francs and left without having sinned in action, but probably in thought. So, finally, we come to The Little Mermaid. This story is probably the best known in a long line of stories involving fish people, and was somewhat inspired by Undine, a similar story that I would love to talk more about, but that'll have to wait for a future video. What you need to know for now is that Undine carried themes akin to what many contemporary audiences take issue with in adaptations of The Little Mermaid, namely the titular character's success depending on the feelings of a man. Andersen himself noted in his letters that the contrast between the endings of The Little Mermaid and Undine were very intentional. The story starts off with a description of the titular mermaid's home and family. The Little Mermaid is the youngest of 6, and she and her sisters grow up hearing stories of the surface world from their grandmother. Their dad is also there, no idea what happened to their mom. Quick side note, none of the main characters here have names, so be ready for a lot of the mermaid and the prince. As the princesses grow up, each one is allowed to visit the surface on her 15th birthday. They are then allowed to swim up to the surface whenever they like, which isn't too often since the novelty wears off quickly. But it is often enough that the youngest mermaid is very sad she can't join them. And, worse, she can't even cry about it since mermaids are physically unable to do so. Eventually, though, our main character turns 15 and is allowed to swim on up. Her grandmother prepares her according to custom, and the princess goes up to the surface, where she finds a ship hosting a birthday party for a certain prince. And there are fireworks. Not the love at first sight kind, I mean actual fireworks. Okay, maybe also some romantic ones. Unfortunately, as the night goes on, a storm rolls in that eventually leads to the ship falling apart. It takes until it actually sinks for the mermaid to find the prince and remember that humans can't breathe underwater, She swims him to the nearest shore and leaves him there, where he is later found by a group of young girls working in a temple. The mermaid then swims home in sorrow and barely talks to anyone, not even telling her sisters what had happened during her visit to the surface. She stops tending her garden and spends a lot of time with a statue she keeps there that apparently looks a lot like the prince. Eventually, she does tell her sisters what happened. Word spreads of the youngest princess's adventure, and eventually a mermaid who knew of the prince and what kingdom he hailed from catches wind of the situation. She tells the princesses, and the 6 of them swim up to the prince's castle. So, any guesses on what the princess does next? If you guessed option C, you would be correct. Over time, she longs more and more to be where the people are, and live among them, because the human world seems so much bigger than hers. And I have bad news for you about the ratios of landmass on the Earth's surface, buddy. She soon finds she has some more existential questions her sisters can't answer, and turns to her grandmother once again. Her grandmother explains that humans are mortal, and that their lifespans are much shorter than those of the mermaids. However, unlike mermaids, who just turn into sea foam when they die, humans have immortal souls that rise to the heavens. The princess and the grandma have a debate about whether it's better to live and die as a mermaid or a human, and the grandma explains that the only way for a mermaid to get a soul is for a human man to fall deeply in love with them. She also says that will never happen because humans find whatever is inhuman to be ugly. And I have great news for her! And then the princess attends her father's ball, where we learn she has the most beautiful voice above or below the sea, just in time for her to run off and find the sea witch, who will surely charge a fair price for her magical services, and not mess with the princess's one marketable skill and medium of communication at all. The witch is very straightforward about the whole deal. There is no 3 days and you turn back into a mermaid business. The potion is permanent, and either the princess gets married and gets a soul, or she has to live and die in constant pain, with no afterlife to look forward to. Then, there's the matter of payment, and oh no, who could have seen this coming? The princess is like, sounds good to me, and the witch promptly makes the potion and cuts out the princess's tongue. No magical mute button for you, your highness. By the next morning, the princess has made her way to the prince's palace and takes the potion. The prince finds her there, and understandably is wondering how she got there. She looks up at him with her big ol' eyes, and he politely doesn't question her further and instead brings her inside to be clothed and tended to by the palace slave girls. Yay. Later on, the girls sing for the royal family and their new guest, which makes the former mermaid sad because she used to sing way better than they can, and now she can't even tell the prince what she gave up for him. However, with her new leggies, she can dance, and dance she does. Everyone is super impressed, and the prince calls her his little foundling. Hold on, let me look something up. Foundling, an infant that has been abandoned by its parents and discovered and cared for by others? Bro, she's exactly a year younger than you. I get that age gaps are more meaningful at 16, but come on. Anyway, the point is, the prince really likes her. Not like that. And proclaims that she should never leave him. She's even allowed to sleep outside his bedroom door on a velvet pillow. Okay, this part is weirder than I remember. The prince takes her on all sorts of adventures, and when they go mountain climbing, her feet are bleeding enough that the prince's companions start to notice, and presumably they don't say anything, and the prince himself is completely oblivious to the whole situation. Meanwhile, every night, the mermaid goes down to the water to cool her feet in the sea, because salt water is super great for open wounds. Why would you do this? The story goes on to explain that while the prince is growing more and more fond of the little mermaid as the days go on, it's more like how a kid would love their new pet puppy rather than a potential romantic partner. And it's not because he's an arrow king, rather, he's already in love with another girl, one from the temple the mermaid left him at after the storm. And to top that all off, the prince is supposed to be married to a third unrelated girl, a princess from the neighboring kingdom. However, the mermaid knows he isn't interested and is only traveling to said kingdom to placate his parents, which is confirmed when the prince tells her as much and says that, because she looks like the girl he credits with saving his life, if he ever marries, he will probably marry her. Weird thing to say to your figurative puppy dude. He's even nice enough to take her with him to meet the not fiancé, and uses the boat ride out there as an excuse to mansplain the ocean to her. When they arrive in the kingdom, they're greeted with a series of banquets, balls, and all kinds of celebrations. all conspicuously lacking a certain princess. Apparently, this is because she's off getting herself an education at the Holy Temple and couldn't come until she completed her final exams. Which Holy Temple is she studying at, you ask? Well...
It's you! Hey, thanks for being so cool. I just know you'd be saying how happy you are for me right now if you could talk. That's exactly what you'd be saying, because I'm so happy, and I'm going to marry this girl who's not you, and it's going to be super great. And we'll live happily ever after, with you third-wheeling on that pillow outside my bedroom forever!
And the mermaid still can't even cry about it. Fortunately, her sisters hear all about the wedding and come to the rescue. The mermaid notes their heads are all shaven, to which they say the sea witch made them a deal in exchange for their hair. A magic knife that, if the little mermaid uses it to kill the prince, his blood will turn her back into a mermaid and she can live her 300 years under the sea. So, she takes the knife, goes to the newlywed's tent, and poises herself to stab the prince when...
My beloved.
At which point she promptly throws her knife and herself into the ocean, where her body immediately turns to sea foam with the sun rising in the distance. Except then the mermaid realizes she can see the dramatically appropriate sunrise. And, above her, hundreds of ethereal forms singing in voices too beautiful for human ears to ever hear. Realizing she also has a magic ethereal body and, presumably, a tongue to match, the mermaid asks what's up and is told that these are the daughters of the air. Similar to mermaids, they don't have eternal souls. However, unlike mermaids, their one chance at gaining one doesn't depend on the feelings or actions of others, but on their own good deeds, or rather through a genuine attempt at doing good for 300 years. The daughters explain that, since the mermaid bore her suffering so bravely, she has a chance to continue to do good and earn a soul. And, as a bonus, spirits of the air have a chance to shave a year off their time for every good child they find, and also lose a year for every tear they shed over a naughty child. Oh, yeah, by the way, the mermaid can cry now! Have fun with that! Something particularly interesting about this last part, besides the fact that the mermaid can now enjoy the catharsis of a good cry, is the explicit references to God. Throughout the earlier parts of the story, particularly those where the mermaids are providing exposition, the talk of souls in the afterlife are pretty vague and generalized. Humans are explained to have immortal souls that rise up into the clear sky where the stars are, not to God or even to heaven. But these last few paragraphs are full of references to a capital G God. Where the little mermaid lifts her arms to the sun, it's God's son. When the daughters of the air explain the reward for their service, it's to rise into God's kingdom. And the years added and removed from their servitude aren't just magically shifted around by some supernatural abacus. God is the one dealing out the consequences. This clear shift in vocabulary lines up with the point in the story where the little mermaid is given a chance at life, at happiness. It's where she's brought in by people who care deeply for her and believe she is just as worthy of this reward as any other living thing. Christian was, by all accounts, a deeply religious man. I told you the name fit. He also mentioned on multiple occasions his attraction to other men, and given his time and place, there is a significant chance that he struggled to align his attraction with his faith. Denmark didn't remove the death penalty for crimes against nature, which included sodomy, until 1966. Christian died less than 10 years after that, and same-sex intercourse wasn't legalized until 1933, over 50 years later. We can't know how Anderson would describe his identity in modern terms, but it's clear from his diaries and other writings that he always saw himself as an outsider. And it sounds like the people in his life agreed. When he was 20, his landlady taunted him for not really being a man. His most beloved princes never returned his affections, chalking his devotion up to a generally childish demeanor. And his stories consistently feature protagonists whose arcs center on their otherness. The Little Mermaid is a story about someone who's been told, over and over again, that they have no place in God's creation and don't deserve salvation. And instead of accepting what is by all accounts an inevitable oblivion, the mermaid chooses hope. She chooses to believe that she's worth more than 300 years under the sea. She chooses to believe that she can be a part of this world, and she does everything in her power to reach her salvation. And the steps she takes to achieve this, what it means for people like her in our world, that's open for interpretation. Because the mermaid doesn't stay a mermaid, she becomes human. She does do the one thing she's been criticized for in every edgy Disney movie critique, and give everything up for a man. The story makes it very, very clear that this is her motivation, and in the moments before her death, in every instant she's reminded that the prince doesn't love her the way she wants him to, the way she needs him to survive. And she laments that he will never know what she gave up for him. But this isn't framed as a personal failing of the mermaid herself, or some obvious choice that, of course, this stupid girl would make. It is a genuinely difficult decision for her, one she thought over and colors every aspect of the story. And ironically, the mermaid's motivation to become the prince's beloved is one of the things about the story that adds to a message not about conformity, but of a person's inherent worth. She doesn't love him because that's what's expected of her, she just loves him. And she wants to be loved. And the way her family shows her love at the beginning of the story is, well, it deprives her of a humanity she was never granted. The love she wants is one that acknowledges her metaphorical and literal humanity. Intentional or not, Hans Christian Andersen created a very concise, thorough allegory for how a lot of societies treat queer people and the other in general. The casual assumption that an integral part of who we are is damned, and our choices are to either cut that part out of us or accept our fate. And, most importantly, how we can react to those sentiments. We can throw out the knife and carve a place for ourselves without the need for the affection of those that were never going to accept us in the first place.